I was driven to New York. I was 9, and that was in 1964, so I can't identify the building. I don't know the address, can't identify the building. But you go into this building, and you go into the elevator, and it looks like a normal elevator. But they tell you, don't touch the walls. And instead of going up or down like a normal elevator, it goes to the back, and it takes on this shape of an oval. It becomes almost like a bullet traveling. I don't know the tech involved, but it's like instead of being a square room that it started off being, it's suddenly oval shaped, and it's got this weird vibration to it. And it takes, in 1964, it took about 20 minutes to get to Mars. I mean, you're in it, you go. I don't know about all of these theories about the Van Allen radiation belts or any of that, because I didn't go through a spaceship. I went through the Jumpgate. When I first went to Mars, they put me in Shula with the colony kids. They had me in school for about 10 years. So I went there as a child without parents, but as one of a group of children who were there without parents. And we were considered freaks because we were MELABs. All of us had genetic modifications. All of us had weaponized psi abilities. And we were considered freaks. And the German society in space is a Teutonic society. It's not. If you're a wimp, you're not going to make it. You have to fight for yourself. You have to defend yourself. You are generally rewarded for being a bully, as long as you're not bullying the people over you. You're supposed to be loyal to them unless they get deposed, and then you're loyal to the guy who deposed them. So you're loyal to the position no matter who's in it. There's a fine line that you're supposed to walk between aggressive enough to survive and submissive to the regulations. I've had trouble with that being back on Earth because it's completely unacceptable behavior in America.
Now, this group of children you were with when you got there, or did you join them? Did you travel there with them, or did you join them after you got there?
I traveled there with them. There were, I think, 8 of us.
So were you allowed to be friends with them, or did they prevent you from that?
We were in the same room, boys and girls together. You slept there, you ate there, we shared bathrooms.
So you no choice really then.
Yeah, it was, you weren't supposed to be intimate, but you had no choice but to be around each other, whether you liked each other or not. And then at the same time, you were being forced into this Teutonic culture. And this was the first time I was given a name rather than being number 7. They called me Penelope, which is actually my birth name, but I didn't have a last name, so I was just Penelope. And I went to class, and they teach things a lot different there than they do here. They teach a variation of electric universe. That's the closest theory on Earth that is correct from their point of view, working with the ETs. They also teach quantum mechanics. And their math is base 60 instead of base 10, which makes a lot of the irrational numbers become rational. You know, the ones that are never ending because they don't divide up properly, like pi. Pi and phi and numbers like that. So they use base 60. Music is set where A is 432 instead of 440. I know I was considered a freak.
Right. Now, was it just the other children that would treat you that way, or was it the adults too?
It was the adults too. It was the whole time I was in the SSP, I was a freak. Because I had been modified with reptilian DNA. And I had weaponized psi abilities, and I was able to do things. Those abilities are behind a firewall now, where I have to be really angry or really scared to be able to access them. Not just like I think I'm going to be hurt, but more like I've been hurt. And I remember using it once while I was still in Shula. The Mars raptors brought down a wall at the school. I got a group of about 20 people around me and formed a barrier like a bubble around us, and watched the horror on the outside. That was as big as I could make the bubble. We were safe inside it. And apparently we were the only survivors. The Germans have a technology, Tony calls it rephoning. I don't remember what it's called. I don't remember the German term for it. But they get the coordinates. And for each point in time and space, there are like 20 coordinates for this tech. They get the coordinates for when the attack happens. And then they go back in time and pull the humans out. However, because once you have the coordinates, you can go back to that point over and over and over and over and over till you wear out the spot in time. Which, yeah, that can happen. You end up with a hole in the fabric of time, which creates its own problems. So you have to kind of make sure you stop short of that. But they went back through and pulled everybody else out of the cafeteria. And for a short period of time, I was a heroine. Didn't last long. I was still a freak. But I had saved 20 people, so they knew what actually happened. And somehow they went back to before the attack and repelled it. Probably the same concept and tech. But when I first started getting the memories back, that was the memory that came up first. And it was such a strong flashback. I could smell the blood, human and raptor, because, you know, our people, the Germans, were armed all the time, because the raptors are a foot taller and a couple 100 pounds heavier, and they come armed with claws that are 6 inches long and sharp as razors. In a unarmed fight, they're going to win every time. So our people were armed at all times. The raptors are not a stupid race, but they're a race that has... They used to have space flight, and they're related to the race that Lacerta is on Earth, the subterranean reptoids. They're related races, where the ones on Mars have lost space flight, they've lost their tech, and they've reverted back to caveman. And they're in tribes. They don't have a central government, but they have areas that they're very territorial about. And they have, they call them temples, but they appear to be ancient tech sites. Like, say humanity collapsed back to the Stone Age, and the group decided that the Los Angeles airport was a temple, and they guarded that for the next 10,000 years.
Right.
That's kind of what these raptors have done. They have ancient tech sites that they've held as temples. And a lot of the problems between the Germans and the raptors are the Germans' fault, because they came in, they were told, these are the areas that your allies, the Draco, have by treaty. Well, they didn't like those areas. So they found places where the raptors and the mantids had cities, and they used nukes on them to clear out the original inhabitants, and that automatically created wars. And those wars, well, the one in the Northern Hemisphere ended in 1990, and from what I understand, the one in the Southern Hemisphere is still ongoing. So that's what started the wars initially. And then right after they signed the treaty, the Germans sent the American Marines into one of those temples to get tech. And that was what Randy Kramer calls the Battle of the Blender. It wasn't pretty. And it was stupid. And my commander at the time was held responsible by the Draco. I'll never forget when this tall white Alpha Drac comes stomping into the office and pulls out my commander and held him personally responsible for that mess and said, "You have violated our treaty, you have dishonored us," and just claws from the pubic bone up to inside his rib cage and just shredded him. And as soon as the Drac left, the medics put what was left of the captain back into the regen tank, and he wasn't near as much an asshole after that.
I'd imagine not.
He learned some humility. There's a lot of theory being spread about the ETs right now. Most of it's fear porn. I experienced several non-Earth races that were all physical beings in physical bodies, and nothing interdimensional about them. They were just, they were other beings that had fancier tech, and some of them were telepathic. But as far as spiritual development, they're not any ahead of us. They live in the same duality that we do. That just like with humans, there's 10 to 15% that are good all the time, 10 to 15% that are as bad as they can get by with and still survive, and the rest float by peer pressure of who they're with. And I found that to hold true with all the other races that were in physical bodies. And I dealt with 3 of the 7 races of Draco. I dealt with 2 races of mantids, the raptors, zetas. I only knew 1 naga, so that's not enough to get a feel for the race. There's also a Mars human who is a survivor from the galactic wars that were at least 15,000 years ago. And they're a little taller than us because Mars has less gravity. But they basically look like Apache from the American Southwest. They have kind of a red-orange cast to their skin and brown or black hair, and yeah.
10 years of school on Mars. Was there a graduation, or was it just here now you're... How did you end up in the Mars Defense Force?
There wasn't a graduation ceremony for us. There was for the colonist kids. So we went to the last day of school, and they gave us a couple of days to adjust that we weren't in school anymore. And then we were given our assignments. The whole program is really weird because you wake up, you go in the shower, which is a sonic shower, it's not a water shower, and you come out, and your clothes for the day are on a chair waiting for you, neatly folded with your shoes on the floor, because you own nothing, not even the clothes you wear. You own nothing. And I remember getting the flight suit, and it was like, what? But I'm female, because, but no, it was a flight suit. And the basic one for Mars was, in those days, was red and black. But mine was this dark blue. And I'm like, I don't remember ever being on Earth. Okay? And I had this dark blue flight suit. And I'm like, warum? Why? Well, you're U.S. Navy on loan to us. So you wear a U.S. Navy uniform. I'm like, This made no sense to me at all, but I knew better than to question it. So I was in this blue flight suit, and the uniforms out there are mostly knit, and they're more snug than the ones on Earth are. So I'm in this flight suit, and then they attached behind my ear, they attached the chip. It looks a lot like a Bluetooth. That's the closest thing I've seen on Earth. But it was behind my ear, and it allowed me to interface with the ship's computer. So I was assigned a ship. It looked a lot like the F-15s, except it had a different engine. It was plasma instead of jet, and it had an outrageous range to it. And I was part of a unit called the Valkyrie, or in German Valkyren, and they decided to make that my last name, was my unit, Valkyren. So I was Penelope Valkyren in that altar. And I was there in my physical body, the same physical body I'm in now. I was stuck in a ship and told, your job is to find nests of raptors and take them out, if it's possible to. You know, if it's a big city, obviously I couldn't. But they were tribal and tended to be in smaller groups. The Germans had already taken out their larger cities, so they're kind of they had just started coming up to Neolithic, and we put them back into the Stone Age. So they're really not very happy with the Germans.
These nukes that they used, were they, like your typical hydrogen bomb, or were they like a neutrino bomb?
They were more like the neutron bombs, because there was a time period we had to stay out of them, but then we could reuse them.
So
and
it didn't decimate the city.
No, it just killed everything in it. So I'm not sure it was even nuclear based. It may have been poison instead. Mm-hmm. But whatever it was, there was a time frame you had to wait, and then you could have the city. In those days on Mars, there were these sandstorms that would just travel the whole planet, circling the whole planet. And they have something similar in Arizona and I guess in Iraq, where the sandstorms they come at you like a wall and you can't even breathe. When they come, the sky's red. The rest of the time it's a light blue. It's not as dark as on Earth. Most of Mars is like being in northern Arizona above 8,000 foot. The polar regions have more water, so they actually still have trees. You'll see brush, grasses. That's what that green stuff on Mars is that shows up every so often. It's their growing season where they have plants, and plants are sturdier there because it's so cold at night. They would freeze otherwise. There are flowers, but they don't last very long.
So now, is this native vegetation, or is this something that the Germans brought?
This is native vegetation. It's stuff that's left over from before the Galactic Wars. All of the really frilly, sensitive stuff died. So what you've got left is the really sturdy stuff. The equivalent of cactus on Earth, except that it's trees and brush, and it's the kind of stuff that grows in cactus areas. The trees are a lot like junipers. Most of the high desert of the West has juniper forests because It withstands long times with no water, and it withstands cold nights. And the high desert in Nevada, Utah, those areas is all above 5,000 feet. So you're getting closer to the range of Mars. Mars is more like 8,000 feet. There, you can live in it, but you better have shelter at night because it drops below freezing. The day is about 27, 28 hours long, as opposed to 24 here. And you'd be surprised how quickly your body adjusts to that. I've never gotten back in sync with Earth since I've been back. As far as animal life, there's a lot of native reptilians and insects. They're bigger than they would be here, sometimes a lot bigger. The spiders get to 15 feet across, and they're telepathic, and the mantids keep them as pets like we do dogs. Most of the wildlife has some sort of a shelter for at night, or burrows. There are birds that are about this big. Yeah, the wings come out they're about this big. They're birds, they're black. They come out at sunset, and they're out for a couple of hours. And then they go back in their burrows for the night. That's the only birds I saw there. There are burrowing mammals that they look like capybara with short legs. And since humans have been going back and forth, there are rats from Earth that are almost as big. Rats seem to go along anywhere humans do.
Well, I sure hope they don't become telepathic as well.
Me too. It was bad enough the spiders did.
Did you ever have any contact with those spiders?
Yeah, I would occasionally be assigned to deal with mantids as air support for the Marines. And I would occasionally be ordered to capture a mantid. And they would inevitably duck into a cave, and I would be pounced on by a spider. And I remember being bitten. I remember the feeling of the fangs going in, and they have 2 sets of mandibles. So it comes in like this. And they release a poison that feels like liquid fire. And it doesn't burn for very long because it kills the nerves. And I would pass out. Then I would wake up in the regeneration tank. So apparently someone followed me and found me. So I don't know if the mantid ever got captured or not.
Did you ever have a telepathic exchange?
With the spider?
With the spider, yeah. I'm just curious as what that would be like.
Probably. They were probably reading my thoughts, but I wasn't. I was concentrating too much on the mantid.
Right.
I've had exchanges with mantids. I've had exchanges with Draco. Draco are fully present and aggressive, and humans are not hardwired to tolerate that very long. We just don't have the circuitry for it. And most Draco are aware that too long of a psychic presence will kill the human. And so they just give you a few minutes of it and then block again. But I've been interrogated by both mantids and Draco. And what I will say is the best thing you can do is just open and let them read you, because they're going to anyway. And the more you resist, the worse it gets. And the Germans in charge, that's the advice they gave us. They said, do not try to keep a secret, don't hide anything, just come back and we'll be able to figure out what you told them. And I mean, when you know that your racial stock can't handle it, how else do you do? I know that the colonist kids couldn't have dealt with it. They had not been through the pre-training that I had, and that's part of why that they were using us for Mars Defense Force, was because that mind fracture gave us the ability to hide things from them. If one alter knows something and the other alter is interrogated, the first one's stuff is kept secret because they don't share memory. So there are limits to what these beings can do. So if your mind is fractured and the bits are not sharing memory, then the Germans can keep secrets. And so can the CIA when you come back.
So were the alters programmed to switch when you were being interrogated?
I think so.
Not quite sure of that.
I'm not quite sure, but this is the best theory I've come up with.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that's why they use alters for some of the CIA ops. I found that from research after I came back. Because when I started remembering this, well, I should say, I've had weird dreams my whole life, and weird things have happened my whole life. So I always knew I wasn't standard Earth normal. But I didn't know what had happened until 4 years ago, when a retired NSA agent used a CIA code word on me to make me remember. He activated me. And all of this stuff came pouring back. And that alter spoke German. So I don't speak German well enough to understand it all. I have a lot more memory than I can talk about because I don't remember the German well enough to know what it was about. So I had to do research to know what I was talking about. What is it that I'm seeing? You know? I have this memory of these raptors pouring in through the wall, and I'm smelling blood, and some of it's human and some of it's raptor. Well, what was that? I still haven't found where anyone else has admitted to experiencing it. So my best guess is that it was an attack that no one else has recorded, because it would have been about 1969, 1970, because I was still a kid. That made a deep impression on me.